Good to be with you again. I suppose most of us know saints only through reading about them or hearing about them. There's only one canonized saint that I have known personally in a crowd of hundreds of thousands of people, but there he was in the flesh speaking to us in Philadelphia, Pope John Paul II, his feast day, October 22nd. Yes, he was a very dynamic personality, and for the 27 years he served as Pope, he had such an impact on our world and on our lives. He was born in 1920 in southern Poland near the great city of Krakow. His mother died when he was very young. And when he was 19 years of age, the Nazis invaded Poland, began the Second World War. And they had no use for Polish people. They treated them with contempt. They even made them wear wooden shoes because they didn't want to waste any leather on them. So he was assigned to work in a stone quarry. One day he went home and was knocked over by a speeding Nazi military vessel in the middle of the streets, left for dead. Fortunately, some friends found him after some hours, took him home, and he was able to recover. Another time he came home from work and found his father had died, and his brother also died young, so by 21 he had no natural family left. But he became involved with a number of other young Polish people who wanted to keep their Polish culture alive, in spite of all the Nazi efforts to destroy them and their identity as a people. He wrote prose, poetry. He joined the theatrical group. And after a while, he became convinced that he needed to become a priest, that God was calling him to priesthood. There were several times when it seemed like his life was almost wiped out. On one occasion, the Nazis were going from door to door, home to home, searching for any Polish men. He hid behind the door. Thank God they didn't look behind the door and find him. And so he joined a little underground seminary with the Archbishop of Krakow and was prepared for priesthood and ordained in 1946. He was assigned to some parish work, worked with university students, and he especially loved that, to be with the young people. He enjoyed going with them skiing in the mountains or hiking in the hills, and would take along things so they could celebrate a little mass with them out there in the mountains. Finally, when the church decided to make him a bishop in 1958, the communists didn't object. They thought he's just one more of those intellectuals. He won't do any harm. And even when he was made an archbishop in 1964, they didn't object. He became the Archbishop of Krakow. And even 3 years later, when he was made a cardinal, the communists thought, well, maybe he would cause division in the Polish church with Stefan Wyszyński, who was the primate in Warsaw. But no, they worked together for Christ. He participated in the 4 years of the Second Vatican Council in Rome, and in fact was one of the major influences in drawing up the major document, The Church on the World Today. And so it was that Pope Paul VI invited him to give the annual retreat to the Pope and all the officials in the Vatican, a sign of his esteem for this cardinal. And in 1978, when Pope Paul VI died in August, and his successor became Pope John Paul I, died after only a month as Pope. And so the cardinals looked for someone who was younger, healthy apparently, and so they elected Karol Wojtyła as the new Pope, the first non-Italian Pope in 455 years. And he began his work energetically, beginning to travel all over the world. In the 27 years he was Pope, he visited 124 nations, many of them with very small Catholic or Christian minorities. And he canonized 482 persons, the most of any Pope. And yes, from the very beginning, he had the courage to confront the communists who dominated Eastern Europe and Russia. They couldn't refuse his request after he was elected to go back to Poland. And there he stood before 1 million people in the middle of Warsaw, telling them, "Do not be afraid." The same message he used at his installation. Do not be afraid. And those Polish people learned the message. They began to confront the communist dictators, workers beginning to organize. And so it was that he began the downfall of the whole communist regime in Eastern Europe and Russia, recognized by all other civil authorities as a very strong advocate for peace. And yes, he was a great defender of the truth of the church, of relating it to our modern times, and especially continuing that ministry to youth. How he enjoyed the annual visits and those special occasions when the Catholic youth of the world would gather together in one of the nations. How they enjoyed his support and all that he meant to them. Yes, Pope John Paul II made a great difference in our lives. He was Pope only 5 years when a man tried to shoot him in St. Peter's Square after an audience. And as he was told later, the bullet came within 1 inch of the aorta. If it had struck that main vessel of the blood system, he would have been a dead man. But he said it was the feast of Our Lady of Fatima. And he was convinced that Mary's finger directed that bullet away from his aorta. In spite of that, he recovered, continued to work for freedom, for the renewal of the church, for the implementation of the Second Vatican Council. He journeyed to this country, 1978, for the first time, and it was there I saw him with thousands of others in Convention Hall as he spoke to priests and religious, and then had a Mass in Logan Circle with hundreds of thousands of people gathered around that altar. And I was one of the priests able to concelebrate that Mass and administer communion to the faithful. It was a thrilling moment. Yes, John Paul II ushered us into the new millennium, 2,000 years. And yes, in his latter years, he began to decline. Many attributed it to that injury that he had suffered when someone tried to kill him. He endured Parkinson's disease, as many of us remember, but to the very end, trying to carry out his duties, serving the people of God. He died in the year 2005, and many of us can remember the funeral Mass with hundreds of thousands of people gathered in St. Peter's Square and all the way down the great avenue that leads from there to the Tiber River, and especially so many young people chanting, Sancto Subito, Sancto Subito, a saint, now, immediately. And so the Pope, Benedict, and the cardinals waited for the 5 years as required and began the process that led to his canonization. I'd like to share with you some of the words of John Paul II from that first Mass of installation, when he gave us that message: do not be afraid. Open, I say, open wide the doors for Christ, to his saving power. Open the boundaries of states, economic and political systems, the vast fields of culture, civilization, and development. Do not be afraid. Christ knows that which is in man. He alone knows it. Yes, John Paul II continues to call all of us, do not be afraid. You're not alone. Jesus Christ is with you. His Spirit is within you. Have courage. Confront a world that is often indifferent, antagonistic to Christ. But we are witnesses of Christ, called to witness to his truth, his love, his goodness in our world. We rejoice on October 22nd, the feast day of John Paul II, but we remember his lesson all through the year. May God bless you, keep you safe, bless your loved ones.